Hey guys, what's up? It's Savannah. Welcome back to my channel and welcome back to another episode of Halloween. Today we are looking into an unsolved case, which is something you guys have really requested for a long time and is also something that I haven't done very recently on my channel, so I definitely wanted to include one in this series. For today's video, we are looking at the missing trio of Fort Worth, Texas. Really quick before I get into the video, I know I never really do this type of stuff, but I just wanted to let you guys know I found a Facebook page about the missing Fort Worth trio, the case I'm about to talk about, and I'm going to have it in the description box below just because I found it really interesting. It's like an open discussion, and even to this day, a lot of people are still talking about it. So if you want to go be a part of that or just check that out, a lot of people have put together clues that they think are plausible and just different theories. So I'll have that linked in the description below if you wanted to check that out. So enjoy the video. I personally had never heard of this case when I first looked into it, which made me even more intrigued by it. So with that all being said, let's just jump right on into the video. This case takes place in 1974 in Fort Worth, Texas. December 23rd, 1974, a woman named Rachel Trlica, who was 17 years old at the time, woke up and decided that she wanted to get some last-minute Christmas shopping done. Even though Rachel was 17 years old at the time, she was married to a man named Thomas or Tommy Trlica, who had a 2-year-old son, so she was also a stepmother. Tommy and Rachel actually met in a pretty interesting way. The two of them had met because Tommy had actually dated and had been engaged to Rachel's sister, Deborah. Deborah describes Tommy and her relationship as one that wasn't very serious. She says even the engagement wasn't very serious and she never saw it long term. So when him and Rachel got together, it didn't bother her very much. So much so that Deborah actually lived with Rachel and Tommy. So like I said, December 23rd, Rachel decided she wanted to get some last minute Christmas shopping done. She asked Deborah to go with her, but Deborah said that she was tired and wanted to sleep in, so that's when she called her 14-year-old friend Renee. Lisa, or Renee Wilson as she was called, was 14 years old, and the two of them, Rachel and Renee, were really good friends. Their families were good friends. They would always go on like fishing or camping trips together, and Rachel and Renee had known each other for a couple of years. Renee said she would go as long as she could be back by 4 p.m. that night because she was recently started dating a guy named Terry Mosley, and her and Terry were planning on going to a Christmas party later that night, so she wanted to be back by 4 to have enough time to get ready for the party. Terry had two younger sisters, one of them being 9-year-old Julie Mosley. Julie overheard that Renee was going to the mall with her friend and called her mom and asked if she could go with her. Initially, her mom said no because she was 9 years old, she didn't have money, and it was like kind of random for her to like want to go with them, but her mom decided that she would have just kept complaining if she didn't let her go, so she decided to say okay and that she could go, but she had to be back by 6 p.m. All three of the girls ended up going to the mall. They went to the Seminary South Shopping Center. Rachel was driving and she had parked up at the second floor next to the Sears store. All the girls' families had expected them to be back around 4 p.m. that night. That's what Rachel had told Tommy. That's also the time Renee wanted to be back, and so when 4 o'clock came around and the girls never came home, their families started to get a little worried. And then by the time 6 o'clock came around, they started to get very worried, and so Rachel's brother Rusty as well as her mother decided that they would drive over to the mall and see if they could find the girls, and that way they could get home safely. So Rusty was 11 years old at the time, and Rusty and his mom went to the mall and they were actually able to find Rachel's car but couldn't find Rachel or her friends anywhere. They were able to figure out that the car was locked and the items that Rachel had purchased that day were on the floor of her car. So she had been back to her car to drop off the things she had got, but the girls were nowhere to be found. This is when Rusty and Rachel's mother got a little bit more concerned, so they started going around the mall asking people if they had seen the girls or knew where they were, and no one was giving them very solid answers. The majority of the girls' family and friends showed up at the mall to try to help look for the girls, and still no one could find them anywhere, so the police were called and they took down 3 missing persons reports. They searched Rachel's car and around the premises, but they were unsuccessful in finding any evidence that could lead them to the girls. The next day, Tommy received a pretty strange letter in his mailbox. The letter was addressed to Thomas A. Trlica, which was his name, but it was weird because Rachel typically called Thomas Tommy. She never called him Thomas. Thomas was way too formal. That was her husband, and she just called him Tommy. I'm gonna look over here so I make sure I get what it said in the letter correct. It says, "I know I'm going to catch it, but we just had to get away. We're going to Houston. See you in about a week. The car is in the Sears upper parking lot. Love, Rachel." Obviously, you can can tell by the title of this video, the girls never came home. There were definitely a couple different things that made people very suspicious about this letter. First off, the handwriting, from what Tommy and Rachel's mother say, is nowhere near close to what Rachel's actual handwriting looks like. The letter was sent off to handwriting specialists, but the tests that they ran were inconclusive on whether or not it was the same handwriting. Also, something to note that is just very odd is that these are young girls, and so why would they be going to Houston? Why would Renee, Rachel, and Julie, who was 9 years old at the time, need to go to Houston, be back in a week? Like, the whole thing was very odd. The letter had a blurred postal service number on it, and that number was 76083. So that specific area code was for an area over 100 miles away from where the girls lived, and the postal company was able to determine that even though it was from such a far away area, the postal code, that the letter was sent out of Fort Worth, Texas, because there was no way in the course of 24 hours that that letter would have been able to make it from point A to point B in that quick of a time. To this day, Tommy believes that that letter was not written by Rachel. The police had no real suspects or no real leads to go off of in this case. There were several different witnesses who said that they saw 3 girls getting pushed into a van. There were people that were saying that they saw girls getting pushed into a truck. There were other witnesses that were saying that they saw 3 girls being lured away by a security guard. The police were also going through different sex offenders and known killers in the area and marking them off the list and going through one by one, trying to figure out who could have possibly done this. Because for someone to abduct 3 girls is a very difficult thing to do. To abduct 3 people is a lot of work. So the police were really trying to figure out how this all went about. In 1975, the 3 families came together and pitched in to hire their own private investigator. This private investigator's name was Joe Swaim. From what everyone could tell, Joe was extremely dedicated to solving this case. He held press conferences all the time to try to get this case into the media as much as he could. And in doing this, he actually ended up putting some heat on the police department, so much so that they ended up handing him over the files that they had of the case. Oddly enough though, in 1979, Joe Swaim unfortunately passed away from an overdose. His death was ruled a suicide, and from what I read, he had in his either will, someone had said that he had wanted all of his files destroyed after he died. So once he passed away, his files, including the one on the Fort Worth trio, were destroyed. 7 years after the girls' disappearance, there was another witness who came forward claiming to have seen the girls being pushed in a van. The man said that he approached the man who was initially pushing these girls into the van, and the man said not to worry because it was a family matter. That was that. He left it alone. That story was never able to be confirmed or denied, and it still led the police to no new leads. For so many years, this case kept getting dragged on and on and on with no new information or anything that would be able to lead the girls to being found. And because of this, and because of the fact that the police really didn't know where to go from there, the case ended up being closed. But then in 2001, everyone felt a little bit of hope again when the case was then reopened. And luckily for the families, the strides that the technology had made since 1974 to 2001 was extreme and really led them to believe that maybe this could finally be the breakthrough that they were looking for. The police held a press conference saying that they were super hopeful to finally be able to track down the person responsible. The police said that they had about 20 new witnesses and a bunch of new leads that they were going off of and suspects that they were looking at. The police said that based off of all the information that they've gone over, they really truly believed that whoever was responsible for this was someone that the girls either knew or trusted. And they also believed that this person did not act alone. They believed because it was a 3-person abduction that whoever was doing this had another person helping them. Police believed that they were lured away by someone who they trusted, and once they left the mall, they encountered foul play. And even though the case was reopened, the detectives on this case as well as the police were really looking at this more as a homicide case instead of a missing persons case. Even though they were hopeful that they would find the girls alive, they thought that the likelihood of that actually happening was very slim. The police had sent hundreds of letters to different coroner's offices from 5 different states surrounding Texas, hoping that they would come back with the lead that one of the girls had been found, but unfortunately that didn't happen. The next step that the police took was testing the DNA that was on the envelope that Tommy received. The letter, like I said, had been signed by Rachel, but Rachel's DNA was nowhere on that envelope and nowhere on that letter. The police also ran the DNA through their database, and that came up as a 0 as well. In 2001, there was a man that came forward named Bill Hutchins. Bill had been working as a security guard for the Sears store on the night that the girls disappeared, and he was also a former police officer for the Fort Worth Police Department. He worked as a police sheriff in the 1960s and then worked as a Sears store security guard. He says that on the night that the girls went missing around 11:30 p.m., which is about 7.5 hours after they were known to have gone missing, driving. He said that he got in a little bit of an altercation, a verbal altercation with the man driving the truck. Bill said that him and this man got into a verbal altercation, and Bill proceeded to walk up to the car that the man was driving, and there were 3 girls in the front seat of the car. He said that there was the youngest one who was sitting next to the driver, then the older one who was sitting next to the youngest one, and then the oldest one who was sitting on the passenger side. He said that he started talking to the guy driving the truck and that it all just kind of became one big misunderstanding, and they both apologized to each other and laughed with each other, and the man driving the truck went on his way. He also says that the girls that were in the truck were laughing and smiling and seemed like they were there willingly, which made police believe even more that the person they were with is someone that they trusted. And if you're wondering why Bill never came forward before with this information, he actually did. In 1974, the day after the girls went missing, Bill had heard on the news that 3 girls had gone missing from the mall that he worked at and remembered that conversation that he had with the man in the truck. He then went to the police and told them about this encounter he had with this man, and the police kind of brushed it off and never followed up with him. And Bill thought that they didn't follow up with him because they found a new lead or because they solved the case. But in 2001, when he heard that this case was being reopened, he decided to bring it to the police's attention again, and they finally followed up with him. Something to note about the man who Bill says was in this truck is that he was dressed as a security guard. And I couldn't find exactly if this man was a security guard who worked at the mall or if it was someone who was dressed up as a security guard. Bill said that this man was dressed as a security guard and that he was in his car. I don't know if the two of them knew each other or if they didn't know each other. Bill often got the night shifts at the mall, and so I'm not sure if the two of them ever crossed paths or if this man was never a security guard at the mall to begin with. But according to the police, they found the man who they think Bill was talking about, who said that he never came in contact with the girls and doesn't know where the girls are and had nothing to do with their disappearance. In 1999, Rusty, Rachel's brother, came in contact with a man named Dan James. Dan James had told Rusty, who, by the way, Rusty was actively looking into his sister's case every single day, working on bringing her home. He still is to this day, and I'll get into that more later. But when Dan James approached Rusty saying that he had been working on the case by himself individually and there were things that the police kind of overlooked that he thinks should be looked more into, Rusty decided to see what he had to say. According to Dan, Rachel and Renee had been sighted several different times. These included times at a Walmart and at a gas station and at a country mart. None of these sightings included Julie. It was just Renee and Rachel every single time. Dan James also believes that someone close to the girls had something to do with their disappearance. So now I want to talk for a second about something that you might have had in your head this whole time about what this could all come down to. I want to talk about Deborah for a second, Rachel's sister. When I was going through this case, it was really hard for me to overlook Deborah and really hard for me to overlook Tommy and Deborah's situation. And what counteracts this is that most of the witnesses who said that they saw 3 girls go into a van or into a truck were all with a man. A man was driving the truck, a man was dressed as a security guard, a man was driving the van. But the police also said that they believe this wasn't a one-person job. And for a long time, her own brother, Rusty, believed that Deborah really did have something to do with Rachel, Renee, and Julie's disappearance. Deborah said in an interview she knows that Rusty blames her for the girls' disappearance, but she had nothing to do with it, doesn't know what happened to them, but her best guess is they ended up in white slavery. Rusty also believes that it wasn't Rachel who wrote the letter, it was Deborah. He believes that Deborah wrote the letter and it ended up in the mailbox where her and Tommy and Rachel lived that next day. Rachel had a motive. Rachel had a motive of jealousy, regardless if she said she was actually jealous or not. Rachel had a motive if she was really upset about the fact that her sister married the man that she was once engaged to. But people really do think that that is a heavy, heavy motive. And also, if they were going to go off with someone that they trusted, maybe it was Deborah and Tommy working together. No one really knows. So I want to talk about Rusty for a second. Rusty has been actively working to try to find out what happened to those 3 girls that day. Rusty raised $15,000 and was able to hire a dive team to go search this lake. This lake was called Benbrook Lake, and it was 8 miles away from the shopping center that the girls were last seen at. Rusty really believed that it was a great possibility that the girls were in the lake. He had approached the police several times about this lake, but they never really looked twice at it. And so Rusty this year in 2018 raised $15,000. This was like a month ago, you guys. $15,000 to hire a diving team to go into the lake and search the lake. And there were 3 cars in this lake, which for whatever reason I find that weird to begin with, but there were 3 cars sitting at the bottom of this lake. Rusty had each car pulled out, hoping hoping that when each one got pulled out that the bodies of the girls would be in there. Not that he wishes that these girls had passed away, but at this point their families just want answers. Their family wants to know what happened to these girls. Each car was recovered and there were no evidence of any of the girls in any of the cars. Rusty still is not giving up hope though, and he's actually training to become a professional diver. That way he can go and search these lakes himself. I am so curious to know what you guys think about this case. Do you think it was someone dressed up as a security guard who tricked the girls into going with him, or do you think it was someone that they knew? Do you think it was Deborah? Do you think Tommy had something to do with it? I was reading more into this and I read a comment that said, what if the girls are still in the mall and that's why no one has been able to find them? And what if whoever took them just buried them somewhere in the mall? Which got me thinking too, like what if they're in the basement or somewhere else that the police maybe didn't think to look? There are so many possibilities in this case because there's not a lot of information, so I'm so curious to see what you guys have to think and the theories that you guys come up with, so definitely leave them in the comment box below. I hope you guys enjoyed another episode of Halloween, and I will be back tomorrow with a brand new video. If you're new to my channel, hi, my name's Savannah. I make videos 3 days a week typically, but for this particular series, it is every single day. All my links are going to be at the end of this video and in the description box below, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye guys!